Hi, my name is Debbie Casey, and I'm here today because Channel 11 and KDU Lead has invited us to talk about lead and to share with the viewers some information about lead hazards and how to protect children from lead poisoning. And with me today I have two guests who are going to introduce themselves now.
My name is Eric Fromberg. I'm the manager of the Childhood Lead Poisoning Prevention Program for the state of Maine. I work for the Maine CDC.
And I'm Randy Gray. I'm the Code Enforcement Officer for the town of Skowhegan.
So I wanted to, just for Katie, who's not here today, I did some research on the Dutch Boy Lead Paint Company and found out, because her father had a store in Skowhegan for many years, and she wanted this story told about how he sold a lot of lead paint, and that there's a lot of homes in Skowhegan and the area that are painted with Dutch Boy lead paint. And so the Dutch Boy company was acquired by another company called, I'll have to look at my notes because I'm going to forget. The company was called National Lead Company, and that happened in 1891. So as far back as 1891, the National Lead Company was making paint. And then 1907, they changed their name to the NL Industries because they were also involved in other chemical industries. And they sold the Dutch Boy Paint Company 2 years after the United States Consumer Product Safety Commission banned lead on in-house paint. And they sold it in 1980 to the Sherwin-Williams Company. And National Lead also made solder, pipes, and their lead was used in telephone wires and auto parts. And paint was promoted, the more lead the better, because it made a better paint at the time. They thought that was a premium ingredient. Anyway.
And that's one of the things that we've noticed is lead paint was really a premium paint, and it lasts really well, so especially in areas that are exposed to the weather. So things where we see lead paint now, that was used in the 1950s, for example, is on doors, windows, exteriors, floors, porches, areas that get a lot of wear. And the reason they used it there was because it was such a good paint. The problem is now it's getting quite old, it's producing lead dust, and that dust is poisoning children.
Are you seeing that, Randy, the types of weathering in the lead paint surfaces?
Yes, it's very apparent because I have a small chart here, as you can see, and you can see the town of Skowhegan itself has a lot of pre-1980 construction, which is about 90% of that would have, at one point, in my opinion, would have had some type of lead paint in those structures, without a doubt.
Okay.
And Eric, to just touch on your point a little bit, towns used to use it as well for their crossing guards and their crosswalks.
Yep.
Because the wear and tear for cars going across it would last so much longer.
Yeah.
And you notice the stuff we put down today, you repaint every single year because the paint just doesn't adhere to the pavement like the lead-based paint used to.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Another thing I read this morning is that the paint companies knew as early as the early 1900s that lead paint was toxic, and they knew that it was the toxicity of the paint was directly related to the level of the amount of lead, the percentage of lead that was in the paint. And so why do we need to care about the lead in the paint in terms of children today?
Yeah, the way to think about it is the issue with lead in paint, or one way to think about it is, as a toxicologist, lead that's in paint, that stays in paint and stays on the surface, I'm not worried about. The issue is when that paint starts becomes old, chipping, produces dust from wear and tear, for example, opening and closing windows that have been painted with lead paint, that produces dust. And our big concern are children who are around ages 1 and 2, because they explore the world with their mouths. So they're on the ground, they'll pick up their toys, and what do? They pop it in their mouth. And if there's dust from these sources, it'll get their toys covered with lead dust, and then that's a good way to get that lead from the paint to the floor, onto their toys or hands, and then into their mouths. And it's a double whammy for 1 and 2-year-olds because their brain, not only are they exposed, but then their brain is developing. And the lead interferes with the developing brain, and that's our big concern, is you see changes in IQ, behavior, ability to learn when children, from later on, when children at that age are being exposed to lead. So it's a very big issue in the state of Maine.
Does it also create other disabilities in children that we know of?
Yes, a lot of it's dependent on how much you're exposed to. So for example, the more that you're exposed to, the types of effects and the severity of the effects increase. So luckily nowadays, we don't see children killed by lead poisoning anymore. That was something that you saw in the 1970s, but that's been years since we've seen that kind of thing. So a lot of the effects that you see depend on how much lead you were exposed to, how long you were exposed to, and then also the individual child and their upbringing. So one way to think about it is, as you go through your life, you're exposed, there's all sorts of things that impact how your brain develops. And lead is just one more of those strikes against you. And if you have a lot of other strikes against you, the effects are going to be more severe than someone who does not have a lot of those types of effects.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, we live in good times that way, I think, with education now. And
Exactly.
That's kind of where I think my role comes in, especially for the single-family homeowner that may be living in a home with a child that is tested with a high lead count. At least I can go in and look at their buildings or recommend who they can talk to for better education, such as you folks.
Yep.
And so that, I think, is a good tool today.
Exactly, and it's
Yeah.
really important to try to limit further exposure so you don't have the blood lead level doesn't go up, or that it doesn't stay at that level for a long period of time.
Right.
Exactly.
Interesting.
I raised my two boys in a very much older home. I think it was built in the 1930s, and I was aware that lead, that paint might have lead in it, and that you should protect the children from the chips and maybe not be doing major renovations. What I was recently surprised to learn was how much problem the invisible lead dust is,
Yes.
and that my children were tested for lead, as children are these days, and the lead was normal. What is normal lead levels? What is a lead poisoning? What constitutes lead poisoning in terms of a blood test?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's unfortunately a little bit complicated. One of the things that is hard about toxicology is, as we learn more, over time, we see greater effects at lower and lower levels. And right now, it's pretty clear that at the levels we can detect of lead in blood, that there's no safe level for lead in the blood. Any amount can potentially cause damage to the developing brain. So in that situation, for the national CDC has recommended that any blood lead level that's above 5 micrograms per deciliter is considered too high or abnormal. And so we do some kind of intervention at any level that's above 5. If it's above 15, we, by law, order an inspection if it's a rental unit of the rental unit, and if we find lead hazards, then we need to require the landlord to abate those hazards. We may require the landlord to relocate the family on their dime. If it's a private home, we provide technical assistance. If it's levels between 5 and 15, then we will excuse me, offer a free lead dust test kit. And the advantage of a free lead dust test kit is you can identify where the dust is coming from and then take actions to try to prevent further exposure from that dust, either by cleaning or by blocking access, to example, for a window that might be a problem, something like that.
Okay.
It's probably a good idea, isn't it? What little bit of studying I've done on this, it's probably a good idea to actually inspect your home to locate where the lead might be. So,
Absolutely.
so you can actually maintain that area at a higher rate than you would the rest of your home. And certainly maybe even the placement of younger children in that area.
That's exactly
Yeah.
true. And there's a
So
couple of
can anybody
ways.
get a lead dust test?
Yep, you can get them if you go to our website at maine.gov/healthyhomes. So that's one option, is you can do a free lead dust test kit, and there's actually a video we have on YouTube that shows you how to do a test kit, and it's very simple. That looks for dust. Another option is you can go to the hardware store and buy a little device called a lead check. Or there's different makers, lead check is one of them. And it's like a little pen with a brush on the end, and you break little glasses of chemicals inside, and if you rub that on the surface, if it's lead paint, it'll turn pink. And the catch there is you need to make sure the surface is chipped. So if there is lead paint below good paint, you'll make sure that you'll catch whether or
You'll
not
be
there's
aware
lead paint
of
that's
that.
covered,
Yeah.
exactly.
That's
And once you know that, you then know, well, okay, if I'm gonna do home repairs on my windows, you'll know which ones are likely to have lead in them, and you know to hire somebody who's certified to do that safely.
I have, one of the things that I was doing this year as part of being a community health educator was visiting hardware stores and restocking their posters with information about, how to be careful about lead. And I'm hearing that people believe that lead isn't a problem anymore. And maybe that is because the symptoms of lead exposure can be confused for other things like hyperactivity disorder or behavior problems or learning issues. So that really, the only way to know is to have your child's blood level
Tested,
tested.
exactly.
And it's a mandate in the state of Maine?
Well, all children who are ages at 1 and 2 should, if they're on main care, they should be tested. That's a national requirement. At the state level, everyone else should have a blood lead test or be assessed for risk by their pediatrician. So the pediatrician or provider will have a series of questions that they ask. For example, do you live in a pre-1950 home, because that's what's most at risk? Or do you work in an occupation that works with lead, your parents? And if you answer yes to any of those, then you should have a blood lead test.
So that brings up that other sources of lead besides paint in the home. And that you mentioned occupational hazards. Those occupations would be people who work in renovations,
Exactly.
people who work in...
Yeah, by far, the majority of poisonings we see in the state, I would say 95% of them,
Yeah.
are due to paint in the home.
in the home.
Some of the other areas where we see exposure, the issue of working is an interesting one, because the child who is most at risk of being poisoned through work exposure is the worker's own child. We've seen excuse me, situations where house painters, for example, have contaminated their car and even their car seat with dust from their work. And then when they put their child in the car seat, the child is ending up getting exposed to that dust and ends up getting poisoned. So careful hygiene around, if you're working with lead, making sure that you change your clothes before you go in your house, being careful about what car you use for work, is very important in terms of protecting your own child.
Right. And to keep washing the child's hands and their toys and whatever
Exactly.
as well, because the children put their hands in their mouth.
Other sources of exposure, rarely we'll see water. We recommend that everyone in the state test their well water if they're on well water. I would say the other issue is soil, and again, that's from lead paint. Typically around any old home, the soil will have elevated levels of lead. That becomes a concern in particular when you track soil into the house. Then it becomes available for a child.
Okay, so suppose I live in an apartment and I have a peeling paint on my kitchen windowsill. What are some of the things that you should do besides keep the child away from that windowsill, or fix the windowsill, or let my landlord know that my windowsill is peeling?
Yep. Certainly letting your landlord know,
Letting a landlord know.
and possibly talking to code.
Yes, that, and what we're trying to do now, and has become more very active in the information that we pass out. There's so much good literature that you can pass out that tells people how they can clean, how they can safely live in a home that contains lead without an exposure. So there's a lot of good information. So I think education is extremely important.
Right.
And that's what we're trying to do now as well.
And it's important to remember that by far, Maine has an incredibly old housing stock.
Oh, yes.
And many children are raised in that house without becoming poisoned. It's really in those houses, in apartment units, where the paint isn't maintained that we have problems. The other possible source of exposure is when people in particular decide to do their own home renovation. So what we don't want folks to do is do a lead check, find that they have a lead paint, and then whip out the sandpaper and try to fix it. That's a real good recipe for poisoning your child.
I actually did some reading on that, and I was actually amazed on how simple you can actually do maintenance on your lead-based paint if you follow 5 or 6 easy steps, and obviously make sure you wet sand, and make sure that you put plastic down, and you pick that plastic, and you wear rubber gloves for protection. And a point I didn't even realize is you shouldn't even hug a family member if you've been working in that area, because you are passing it on to exposure at that point.
Yep.
So I think that's all good information for people to know. Yep.
So if you're living in an apartment and you've notified your landlord and things aren't happening real quick, you can do something as simple as put a barrier, a piece of furniture in front of the peeling area to keep the child away from it. You can clean regularly with wet cloths and throw them away, right?
Yeah.
Disposable
Yep.
cloths. And let's see, what else? Keep
Well-
the child's hands clean, keep the child off the floor, because lead is a heavy metal. Lead dust settles on window ledges where kids like to play with their little people. It falls on the floor where kids drop their pacifiers. It, where their
It's
toys are,
also
they
the
crawl
case
around.
that they could do a lead dust test. And if the results are elevated when they do a lead dust test, we'll talk both to the family about what can be done, but we'll also contact the landlord about things that they can do. And if the results are extremely high and we feel like they're of imminent danger, then by law we have to go in and do an inspection. And again, if we do an inspection and we find lead hazards, then we have to require the landlord to abate that property.
I see. And I understand that there are areas outside of the apartment that could also be of risk. You mentioned the soil specifically around the perimeter of the foundation as being possibly contaminated from maybe past years when there was painting going on, or sanding, or chipping. But also other areas of the apartment building that may not be as well maintained as the interior of the apartment might be the hallways, or the porches, or the stairs.
And that's a really good point, because one of the issues we see is that nobody really owns those common areas. And so often they're not taken care of. They can be a source of dust, which again gets tracked into the home.
Right. So walking on poorly maintained steps, you can track lead in from those areas into your home again.
Absolutely.
So cleaning weekly with wet methods.
The other thing we recommend
cleaning,
is taking off your shoes at the door.
taking shoes off at the door.
Yep.
Makes sense.
Eric, I also wondered, and you see this from time to time, I see it from time to time, is someone that may be pressure washing their home outside, and certainly especially the pre-1950 homes, it's just bound to be lead-based paint on that structure. Even if it isn't on the surface, it certainly is underneath. So that's another, I would think, dangerous exposure for the soil.
Yeah, it certainly would result in soil levels. And the Department of Environmental Protection has regulations around what kind of work you can do so you don't release a lot of chipping and peeling lead paint into the environment. And if you're planning to do that kind of work, it might be worthwhile to call the Department of Environmental Protection
Yes.
and find out what are some good techniques where you can do that in such a way so you don't make a mess.
Yes, yes. And another thing that's come to mind, because there is still demolition of older structures, is to make sure you hire a competent individual to go in, and even though I think up to 4 units kind of, I think they kind of have an exemption under the code as far as demolition goes, they still is not an exemption to have your home inspected by someone competent in the law to make sure there's no lead-based paint there and no asbestos there.
Or
as
if
well.
there is, that it's demolished in
Yes.
a way so it doesn't spread a lot of dust around the neighborhood. Exactly.
Yes.
And that's fairly straightforward. I mean, the town of Lewiston, for example, right now is looking at demolition protocols where part of it is you just wet the building as you're doing the demolition to try to prevent a lot of dust exposure.
Sure.
So intact lead paint is not the problem, it's deteriorating lead paint. So you inspect your apartment and you don't see what you think are signs of deteriorating paint, but then you need to recheck regularly because paint continues to change. So it may be fine this year when you move in, but maybe 6 months or a year from now you need to check again.
Exactly, and that's one of our recommendations to landlords is in their lease, to help protect themselves, they should have something in the lease that says if the tenant notices any chipping or peeling paint, that they have to notify the landlord so the landlord can go in and maintain it so it doesn't become a hazard.
Right, because the windowsill could be intact when they move in, but
Exactly.
a piece of furniture bumping against it, a pet, or something could crack that paint, and now it's chip. Now, I know what chip paint looks like, and I think most people know what peeling paint looks like, but there are other signs of deterioration, that flaking and the chalking. Can you explain what chalking looks like?
Well,
And-
I think that's what, in my opinion, I think that's just the fine dust that you see on the bottom of the windowsills and different things like that, that show up when you open and close the windows.
Well, the other thing you'll see is on sometimes the exterior, if you take your hand and wipe it,
Oh, yes, I've
and
seen
you'll
that.
find
Oh, yes.
dust on your hand.
Yeah, I've
And
absolutely
that's
seen that
exactly-
before.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So you might not think there's anything wrong with that surface, but it actually may be chalking
Yeah.
and emitting lead
Yeah.
dust, and you wouldn't be aware of it. I was shocked
Lot to
to
learn.
learn in the last few weeks how even trace in microscopic invisible levels of lead dust can cause problems.
Yes, and again, that's one of the important things about knowing where you have lead paint in your house, but also cleaning with wet methods and, excuse me, throwing away the towels that you use rather than just
Yes.
pushing the lead dust around.
Right.
So Eric, I do have just a kind of a question for you there, because I find that interesting. Is usually if you do have chalking, because I have seen that for sure, is it only lead-based paint that will leave the chalking behind, or will
That I
other
don't
aging
know.
paint? Will
That I don't
do it
know,
as well?
yeah, I don't know that for
I
sure.
don't either.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
That'd be kind of interesting to find out.
Yeah, the thing to know is that, generally speaking, if you have a pre-1950 house, there's a very high chance
Yes.
that you're gonna have lead paint in that house somewhere.
Yes.
And on the one hand, you have it somewhere. On the other hand, it's also surprising where you don't have it. And that's the value of testing, is you can learn where you have the lead paint and know, for example, when I did my house, I was surprised how little lead paint there was in the kitchen, which made me happy.
Mhm.
It was in other areas of the house, and then that I was able to deal with that in a safe way.
So there's a lot of information on your website, the CDC website, and also people can come downtown to Somerset Public Health and get all kinds of tip sheets and information. Just stop in at 31 Commercial Street. And if somebody were to get a lead dust testing kit, talk about the best places to test.
Sure. Well, first, you can get it by going to our website, which is maine.gov/healthyhomes. And there's also another website that may be of value to landlords, maine.gov/healthyhomes/landlords. That site lists all the different laws that we're aware of that are relevant to landlords around maintaining a healthy home. And it's a good resource for landlords. But if you go to maine.gov/healthyhomes, you will find a link to order a lead dust test kit. And generally, we recommend that you test a windowsill. Excuse me. Windowsills are good places to test because lead paint was often used on windows, but also young children, they like to look out windows, and when they do, their mouth is right at the level of the windowsill,
Yes.
and they'll often put it right there, and that's a source of exposure. The other place we recommend is the kitchen floor, because it's a high traffic area, so if there's dust somewhere in the house, often it'll end up in the kitchen floor. And then the other place we recommend is a floor where the child plays. It may be their bedroom, it may be the playroom, etc. And whenever you do a test, you should feel free to give us a call. And if you feel like you need guidance on other areas to test, or if you have questions and you think another area to test would be better, you should feel free to give us a call and we can talk you through that.
So children are at most at risk. Adults can still
Yes.
get exposed. What about pregnant women? Are they at risk?
Yeah. Generally speaking, as I said, the problem, or our big issue with 1 and 2-year-olds is this combination of behavior in the developing brain. So it's not uncommon for us to inspect a unit and find lots of lead hazards, and the 1 and 2-year-olds will be poisoned, but 5, 6, and all the adults will not have elevated blood lead levels. And it's because they don't have that hand-to-mouth activity. Adults get exposed in other ways. So occupation. So if you are a painter or a renovator, in particular, using heat guns to remove paint. That will vaporize the lead, and then inhalation becomes a source of exposure. Yeah. And then sometimes, again, there's the potential risk for well water. If you have really bad well water, it's very acidic or salty. It can dissolve the lead from lead solder, and then that will end up in the water. And we've had a situation where a pregnant woman was exposed in that way. A newborn baby had an elevated blood lead level. But that's pretty rare.
How about, I know now the Maine State Plumbing Code has actually removed any lead being used in any of the solders or products
Yes.
like that. But was that also, that must have also added to lead poisoning as well?
Yeah, what's interesting is in most pipes, bacteria, it sounds kind of gross, but it's actually good, will grow on the inside of the pipe and form what's called a biofilm. And that actually protects the copper and the lead from dissolving into the water.
Yes.
And so really we only see problems with solder, lead or copper dissolving in the water if there's really something bad with the water chemistry. So like really acid water, really soft water, really salty water, those kinds of scenarios. And typically you can notice that if you see green staining on your bathtub or the sink, and that's the copper that's being dissolved from the pipes. And if you have lead solder, potentially there's lead being dissolved from the pipes as well. A good solution, short-term solution to that, is whenever you get water to drink, you just turn the water on and run it until it gets cold. That way you know you're getting water from the well, rather than water that's been sitting in the pipes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, that's interesting, very interesting. Also, I kind of wondered, because I am asked this from time to time, a landlord cannot do his own maintenance, can he?
If it involves lead paint.
Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah, it's a good point. Yes.
They can do the maintenance if they're trained.
Yes.
That's the issue. They need to be certified by EPA to work with lead paint so that they can do it in a way that's safe.
Yes.
So if you're interested in hiring somebody to do work on your unit or on your home, make sure that they're RRP certified.
Yes.
And if that's the case, they've been trained on how to do work with lead without causing more of a problem.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
So I don't know if we've missed anything important. In summary, it's important to know if you have lead paint in your home, and it's important to get your child tested to see if they've been exposed. Any final comments?
I would say the big thing is, like you say, being aware of your home, knowing how to live with lead paint safely, namely making sure that it's intact and stays intact, and then again, talking to your provider about getting your child tested.
Any closing comments?
Just education. You know, I think shows like this will help the general public. I think it will help our tenant-based folks out there. So I think education is a big part of this whole thing. Yeah.
We thank Channel 11 for having us on.
Hi, I'm Tina Bernier with the Maine CDC. If you're watching this video, you're ready to use our simple 10-minute kit to find out if you have dust from lead paint in your home. After watching this video, you won't be a licensed lead technician, but you will be able to do this easy test. Let's get started by unpacking the box. You'll also need to have tape and a pen handy. Lastly, right before you do the test, wash your hands. The first place you'll test is the kitchen floor. You can't see dust from lead paint, but just a tiny bit in your home can be harmful for children. In old homes, dust from lead paint settles on floors and windowsills, the places where kids play and put their toys. That's why you'll test in 3 places where your child may spend a lot of time, starting in your kitchen. First, take the cardboard square and tape it to the floor. Put a glove on the hand you'll use to wipe the floor, and open one of the wipes. Wipe inside the square going side to side. Then fold the wipe in half so the dirty sides touch each other. Wipe inside the square again, but this time wipe top to bottom. Put the wipe in the tube labeled kitchen floor, put the cap back on, and set the tube aside. Take off your glove and throw it away. Now find a spot in another room where your child spends a lot of time and repeat these same steps, but put the wipe in the tube marked other floor. Now let's test a windowsill. Choose a windowsill your child can reach and make sure the window is closed. This is the part of the windowsill to test. Put on a glove and wipe the windowsill from one end to the other. Fold the wipe in half so the dirty sides are touching, and wipe the windowsill again from one end to the other. Put the wipe in the tube labeled windowsill, put the cap on, and throw away your glove. Now you need to measure the windowsill you just tested. Using the tape measure in your kit, put the end of the tape measure that says start at one end of the area you just wiped. This windowsill is 30 inches long. Measuring to the closest inch or half inch is fine. Write down how long your windowsill is on the form that came with your kit. Now you'll measure the width, or from front to back. Put the end of the tape measure at the back of the windowsill where it meets the window. Stretch the tape measure towards you. This windowsill is 4 inches wide. Write down how wide your windowsill is on the form. Complete the rest of the form. Include your phone number and let us know if you own or rent your home. Sign the form and put it, with all 3 tubes, back in the box they came in. Put the prepaid shipping label on the box and mail it. If there is a lot of lead dust in your home, I'll call you and we'll talk about what to do. We know your kids keep you busy, but by doing this simple test, you're taking a big step toward protecting them from lead poisoning.